is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks were up today on signs of progress in the U.S.-China trade dispute. MSCI's index of developing world stocks rose about 0.4%. And that's after U.S. President Donald Trump said he was open to extending the tariff ceasefire deadline. Now, on the continent, South Africa's JSE slightly up today, still gloomy. Traders say local factors, including load shedding, continue to negatively affect domestic sentiment. Also, a ratings downgrade of real estate firm Hyprop weighed on the JSE's property index. Now, also coming up on the show today, South Africa's troubled power company now faces imminent collapse. Nairobi Stock Exchange returns to the green after a dull 2018. And transport systems ground to a halt in Belgium as a union calls for national strikes. Well, let's start off the show in South Africa. The country's power utility Eskom is technically insolvent and will cease to exist at its current trajectory by April 2019. Now, the Department of Public Enterprises made the statement while briefing members of the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises. Eskom's $30.2 billion debt burden represents about 15% of the sovereign debt. The DPE says that if Eskom defaults on its debt, it will threaten the country's economy. Now, Eskom's woes have been spiraling for the last decade. In that time, coal purchase volumes remained pretty flat, while capacity only grew slightly. Additionally, employee costs increased significantly due to the associated employee benefits. Well, staying with Eskom, the utility cut about 3,000 megawatts of power from the national grid from 600 GMT on a Tuesday until about 2100 GMT, a day after cutting about 4,000 megawatts in the worst power cuts, which have been seen in several years. Now, currently, around a third of the cash-strapped utility's 45,000 megawatt capacity is offline. Here's CGTN's Alexandria Majala with more.
South Africa's power utility, Eskom, is implementing major electricity cuts for the fourth day straight. The move saw several small businesses close, while some struggled to attract customers in larger parts of the capital, Johannesburg. The power cuts have prompted frustration among South African citizens, especially the business community, many of whom do not have access to backup power sources like diesel generators.
Where we would normally have bright lights with 100 lights on top of us, being able to see perfectly, we are now having to resort to cell phones and lights so we can see inside what we're doing.
And I want to actually check what code it is. It says web page not available because now I can't connect to my Wi-Fi. Big inconvenience because now I have to phone an electrician to come and assess the vehicle where I could have done it myself.
Eunice Mashaba, a textile shop manager, says she's losing customers who rely on credit cards. This means lost income and growing bills.
Load shedding is really a result of operational problems within Eskom related to very poor plant performance and declining plant performance. You know, Eskom has got more than adequate generation capacity in terms of demand for electricity. But a lot of this generation capacity is not available for duty. It's broken down, or it's undergoing planned maintenance, or it's not being able to deliver the full rated output, so we have what is known as partial load losses, and generally it's resulting in the fact that supply is not able to meet demand in South Africa.
We've got to address this because Eskom is a risk. We've got all our energy eggs in one basket. When the generator of energy in our country reports that there are 6 units, it means that all 6 eggs are broken, and possibly we just have maybe a dozen eggs, and it should not be like that. And that is why we are saying we now need to have a new business model for Eskom, where we're able to minimize the risk, minimize our risk as a nation, like other countries have done.
Eskom supplies more than 90% of the power in Africa's most industrialized economy, but is drawing in more than $30 billion of debt. Experts say that each stage of the power cut is costing the country's productive economy billions of rand per day. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, let's find out more about the situation on ground from Sumitra Naidu. She now joins us in Johannesburg. Sumitra, great to have you on the show. Now, this will be the fourth consecutive day of load shedding in the country. Large industrial consumers expected to be the worst hit. But of course, stage 4 load shedding also inconveniences smaller customers in the country. Give us a sense of the economic impact it is having on businesses in South Africa.
Oh, absolutely, Uche. Small business really feeling the pain of these power cuts. Many are already struggling with the high cost of electricity, and they just don't have the spare cash to invest in generators to get through this time. Those that can still need fuel to work those generators, and the fuel price too has shot up to near record highs. We're now at over $1 a litre. These are all extra added costs that smaller enterprises just can't afford. You have businesses like bakeries, hair salons, retail and apparel, mechanics, food outlets, printing and office support. These are just some of the smaller businesses that need a steady electricity supply to operate and to generate an income. And many are having to close for 4 to 6 hours at a time, depending on load shedding schedule in that area. So it's more critical for medical centers. You know, smaller medical centers need their scanners, labs, life-saving machines to be working consistently. Patients at day clinics, even in some areas of the big hospitals are being affected as well. The traffic chaos is also causing lost productivity. People trying to get to work are spending 2 to 3 hours in the traffic just trying to get to their places of work because the traffic lights are not working. It is an absolute nightmare at the moment, worse so because there was no warning, so that proper planning around the power cuts couldn't be done. Experts estimate that the economy is losing in the region of $280 million a day on stage 4 power cuts, load shedding. So, for some of these small businesses, they may not be around for much longer. A lot of them are losing a lot of income during the day, having to close their doors until the lights come back on. They may not be sustainable in the long run. Uche.
Well, Sumitra, Eskom actually says that its water and diesel reserves are still very low. It's also struggling to keep its mainly coal-fired plants running due to coal shortages. Now, a nationwide strike that we've seen unions planning may further impact Eskom's operation. So is the worst yet to come?
I think so. This is a big worry at the moment. Thousands of workers led by COSATU took to the streets today to complain about rising unemployment, and they're threatening a lot more protest action should government go ahead with this plan to split Eskom into 3 separate entities. Now, it's a critical time. If there's any more disruptions, it will only make matters worse. It's a tough one, though. Workers say so many of their colleagues have lost jobs. The cost of living is increasing rapidly, especially in Gauteng. Wages haven't increased much, and the unions argue that this economy is not growing because of corruption. The Eskom mess is because of mismanagement and corruption. Why should they be the ones to suffer? It will definitely be a bit of a disaster, more than what it is right now, if there's going to be any more work stoppages, especially if it's affecting Eskom.
Now, we know Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan, he met with Eskom executives as well as the board of directors to discuss basically a way out of this crisis. Any solutions come out of that meeting?
Well, so far, Gordhan certainly didn't hold back in Parliament. He delivered a rather grim and sobering report on the state of Eskom, saying that it won't last beyond April this year. It is insolvent, sitting with massive debt and major problems in ensuring any future supplies. So he said they were now looking into getting engineers skilled staff from the international community. You know, this has caused a bit of a stink as well, because many are complaining, why should you go and get international experts when you have skilled people here? You know, you pull in international people, they'll come, fix and leave, and then you're sitting with the problem. If something goes wrong, you don't have anyone to fix it. You've got to call them in again, and these international experts come at a price. But I think what the minister was trying to get at is to draw in and pull back some of the highly skilled staff that Eskom once had, and lost a lot of that staff, you know, to international countries, people looking for more lucrative opportunities abroad. So he's trying to, that is part of the plan now. They've already called some of those experts to come back, to come and fix some of the problems at Medupi and Kusile, these two big power stations that have cost almost double over the last 10 years that it's been in production, have design flaws. This also came out, you know, from the Public Enterprises Minister in Parliament as well. So this effectively has led to unstable generation for the grid. So they're looking into how they're also going to find the money for Eskom. Government will have to bail it out again, but the fiscus is already under immense strain. We're hoping to get more details, though. Well, I suppose once they have a more definitive plan themselves.
Quite right. Well, many thanks for that update, Sumitra. Of course, that's Sumitra Naidu joining us there in Johannesburg. Let's move on now. German business leaders and government officials are in Africa to boost a trade relationship worth billions of dollars. The European country is keen to strengthen ties with the continent's rapidly growing economy. Now, the third German-African Business Summit is being held in the Ghanaian capital of Accra, from where CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports.
The third German-African Business Summit has about 500 business executives and government officials from Germany and Africa in attendance. Since the first summit held in Berlin in 2015, businesses in Germany are pushing to leave their footprint in Africa as it becomes one of the fastest growing economies.
Every year, Germany exports $14 billion worth of goods to Africa, and imports from the African continent going the other way into Germany total around $12 billion annually. The organizers of this summit hope events like this won't only sustain, but also boost that trade relationship.
We see a lot of business opportunities here in trade and investment, and we have ambitious goals for the next 2 to 3 years. Especially in the case of Ghana, we want to double our investment and we want to double our trade volume.
Creating jobs in Africa means Africans are in the lead. So projects are defined by African governments. And German industry and business will see where there's a role where we can support by bringing capital, technology, know-how in partnership with locals, with African co-investors here.
Business leaders from Africa want a fair trade as Germany turns its attention to the continent.
Welcome investors, we have to make sure that we are setting the right conditions which protect our people, and definitely we have to make sure that there's no exploitation.
What we need to do is basically find a way to collaborate. Not to collaborate just by words, but from the governmental level to the policy level and come to industry so that we can basically mediate and see what are our needs, what they have to offer, and come with a conclusion and implement.
That collaboration has already begun. The German government has set up a $1 billion Africa fund to manage risk of German companies reaching out to African countries. And one of the country's biggest firms, car maker Volkswagen, has announced plans to set up an assembly plant here in Ghana. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And now look at our corporate headlines today. An Egypt-based startup may be soon joining the nascent bus sharing market in Kenya. Now, SWVL, which received about $38 million in funding last year, has chosen Nairobi as one of its destinations to deploy its mass transit bus sharing services in 2019. Now, SWVL's co-founder and CEO, Mustafa Kandil, says they're looking to invest in 10 cities outside Egypt in 2019, beginning with the Philippine capital of Manila, as well as Dakar and Jakarta. Meanwhile, Kenyan Breweries, a subsidiary of UK Diageo's East African Breweries, has entered into a settlement agreement with the competition regulator committing to end some restrictive trading practices. The regulator, the Competition Authority of Kenya, says it has ticked off the issue as resolved. And that's after KBL established an internal competition compliance policy that the Bureau will use to inform its partnerships and review controversial clauses and terms of engagement. Meanwhile, car maker Ford has said a no-deal Brexit will be catastrophic for the firm's manufacturing operations in the UK and that it will do whatever is necessary to protect its business. The comments come after a report that the car maker was stepping up preparations to move production out of the UK. The company is the latest car maker to warn on the risks of a no-deal Brexit. Ford employs about 13,000 people in the UK. And reigning world champions Mercedes unveiled its F1 2019 challenger at Silverstone in the UK on Wednesday. Named the Mercedes-AMG F1 W10 EQ Power Plus, the manufacturer is bidding to win both Formula One titles for a sixth successive season. Now, the car has a number of modifications from last year's championship-winning model, including amendments to the aerodynamic rules and an increased weight after the limit was lifted by 10 kg for 2019. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading to a quick break now. Still to come on the show. Nairobi Stock Exchange returns to the green after a dull 2018. And the Egyptian government draws a new contract to attract more investors in the oil and gas sector.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Susan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Now, here in Kenya, the Capital Markets Authority is investigating the country's first major case of insider trading. A renowned financial markets expert, Ali Khan Sachu, is accused of using non-public information to trade shares of oil marketer Kenol Kobil in October 2018. The trades were carried out by Nairobi-based stock brokerage firm Kestrel Capital. More than 430 million shares were traded in the week prior to the announcement of acquisition plans by French company Rubis Energy. Now, there was a sharp rise in trades compared to 475,500 shares of the energy firm transacted in the week before. Now, the law outlines insider trading as a crime punishable by a fine of not more than $25,000 or imprisonment for a 2-year term and a payment of the gain made or loss averted from the illegal trade. Well, of course, investors who took a battering from the dismal performance by the Nairobi Securities Exchange in 2018, they now have a chance to recover this year as the market claws back some of the lost ground. Property and offshore investments are also primed to give higher returns, having closed the year with lower returns than the previous years. Some analysts are arguing that stocks are undervalued and primed for a rebound as investors troop back to buy on the cheap. Well, let's delve further into this with Reginald Kadzutu. He's the Chief Investment Officer at Amana Capital. Very welcome to the show, Reginald. Well, let's before we break down the NSE's performance this year, let's start with this insider trading saga. What do you make of this? What's going on right now? And how does that impact on your thoughts on the effectiveness of the regulator and certainly transparency in Kenya's markets?
I think it was about time that it came out in the market, and a big plus to the media that brought it out. I think if the media had not brought it out or the business journalists had not picked out the anomalies, it would have been swept under the carpet like all the other insider tradings. It has been a common practice, but maybe not to the scale that it was done. My only worry that it's being done at the highest level. If it was junior officers, maybe in Kenol Kobil, in a brokerage firm, yes, understandable. But if it's the owners of the firms who are actually doing it, then it becomes scary of the integrity of the market, of the integrity of the moves that we normally see inside the market. What do I think about in terms of regulation? I think the regulation has been there, but I think they've not been biting. They've not been using the laws that they have to actually rein in some of this, maybe because of fear of driving away investors from the market. You rather keep quiet. But I think what CMA has done now is actually a bit commendable. My only worry is that there are already laws that govern insider trading, and as much as they're in court, these guys are still going on with their business as normal. And I think that they need to have punished them based on the CMA laws before going to the criminal process of going to court.
Quite interesting. Well, let's shift focus now to the performance of the NSE last year and going into this year. Last year, we saw a bear run. The NSE 20 shed over 1,000 points. This year, a stronger start to the year. The bourse actually crossed that psychological 3,000 point mark. So are you expecting a better performance at the NSE this year? And certainly, what economic factors do you think will see driving growth?
Yes, 2019 has started a bit better than 2018, but I will not bring out the carnival because of what we are seeing right now. Most of the moves are coming from the banking stocks because they're about to announce their results. So most people are taking positions to make sure that they benefit from any dividend payments or any upswings that will happen because of the announcement of the results. One major factor that we need to understand by the Nairobi Stock Exchange is that Safaricom moves the market. It's pretty much the largest stock on the market, and their year end is also coming in March. So we find there's a bit of foreigner interest in buying Safaricom, putting in some bids to buy Safaricom just to position themselves before Safaricom's year end. If you look at the fundamentals that drive stock market or stock prices, primarily demand and supply. Why would someone want to demand a stock? Because they see value in the company, and the value in a company is driven by economic growth. So when we go down to the basic, is the economy going to grow that well this year? Right. I don't think so. So I think we're in a small recovery. If you look at it maybe on a technical side of it, the market has been going through cycles. And the cycle we are in, you'll find we had a bear run from around April last year until January this year, which is around 5 months, 6 months. Mm-hmm. We might have a bit of a recovery for the next 4 months, 5 months. The only worry that if we are entering the same cycle that we have entered before, where we have a bear run for 5 months, 6 months, a short recovery, then we might be in a bear run for the next 2 years, if the cycle plays out according to technical analysis. However, it will also support the element of we don't see anything fundamentally changing on the economic side that says the economy is going to grow. We know the economy has been growing at a paltry 5%, primarily driven by government expenditure, not real economic growth. So we might just have a recovery for 5 months, 6 months, but brace ourselves for a longer bear run than what we saw last year.
Right, and one of the major factors, or one of the other factors that are said to have contributed to the decline in the NSE is the fact that we saw profit warnings, a lot of declining profitability. You talked about the banks, that rate cap suddenly impacted their bottom line. What is your outlook for corporates then this year? Do you think, you said results are coming out soon, do you think we're going to see great numbers?
I don't think you're going to see great numbers. You're going to see normal numbers. Even if they are double-digit numbers, most of it is because of cost cutting and not because of expansion of business, not because of real growth that is coming. We know what banks have been doing, laying off staff left, right, and center, closing branches, just trying to make sure that they still remain profitable moving forward. So for corporates this year, I actually see it being a bit of a tougher year. If you look at private sector credit growth from 2017-2018, it's been growing at a bare minimum of 4%. And for the economy to actually grow, for GDP to grow, you need private sector credit to grow at close to 12%. You're 8% off. We don't see that changing. The banks are so liquid, so you find interbank rates around 3%, 4%. And everyone is parking money in government securities, which is a failure for the banking sector because they're supposed to be allocators of capital. And if you take all your funds and send it to the government, who is the poorest allocator of capital that you'll ever find in this world, then we are in trouble because 80% is going to go to recurrent expenditure. So the government borrows cheaply from the excess liquidity that the banks have, but it's not going for production. It's going to pay recurrent expenditure. So yeah, for corporates, I don't see it changing much. Cost cutting, but no real growth in terms of demand.
Well, what's your take on the fixed income market? It has actually been more stable than the equity market. The corporate bond market, however, it still needs to be revived. There's not much action going on there. What do you think are the chances of seeing that market revived, given the fact that we still have that rate cap in place, and of course there's a new tax that came into play on the 1st of January. That's a 30% compensating tax on tax-free bonds. How do you see that all impacting the market?
The fixed income has performed well. Government is giving you 12.5%. You don't need to sweat. You just put the money there and go and sleep. But the only problem is that the government has been trying to push down rates because of the ballooning debt and them having to refinance their debt. So when you start having lower yield papers being issued in the market, that means the duration of those papers is longer. And as long as the duration is longer, it increases the interest rate risk. So if people don't look at the interest rate risk that is coming into play now because of the longer duration of the papers that are coming in because of lower yields, then people will be in a bit of trouble. On the corporate bond market, it will take us back to the element of regulation. We have had corporates failing. We have had Nakumat going under with a commercial paper that has wiped out most of investors' funds in terms of the fund managers that had invested in Nakumat. Then you have At River Mining. Then you have Imperial Bank. Then you have the Chase Bank bond, which collapsed a month after being approved by Capital Markets Authority and NSE. So you find, as a fund manager, any corporate comes out to issue a corporate paper, I look at it and think, is it worth it? Is it worth the extra 2-3%? So if the Capital Markets Authority does not come up with more stringent regulation and oversight on the issuing of corporate debt, whether it's commercial papers or corporate bonds, I think that market will die a natural death. I don't think anyone will put money in corporate.
Now, very quickly, because we're running out of time, the NSC says it will be launching a derivatives market in the first half of this year. It will also be upgrading its trading systems. Do you feel that like the bourse is all ready to go on that plan?
I always laugh when I hear about derivatives in the Kenyan market. You barely have 5% retail participation, or most of the participation in the market is driven by foreigners. So if you can't get a local person just to buy Safaricom, what is going to do with the derivative? If you can't get an institutional investors, if you look at the allocation of assets for institutional investors, most of it moves to fixed income. If you can't get them to even just do the basic things that are there, where the regulations are there, margin trading, buying stocks, being active and all.
So basically the market isn't ready yet.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to use derivatives anytime soon.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Of course, that was Reginald Kadzutu. He's the Chief Investment Officer at Amana Capital. Well, let's shift our focus to another story here in Kenya. The real estate industry is no doubt considered as one of the country's most lucrative sectors. Global brands are now competing for space in the East African state, be it in retail or hospitality. Here's CGTN's Penina Karibe with more on this.
Hardly a day goes by without a discussion about property or the real estate sector in Kenya. And on Tuesday, VAL, a real estate company in country, released a report detailing the extent of the interest by investors in this sector. For the past 2 decades, the Kenyan real estate has grown tremendously, especially in capital city Nairobi.
Growth is basically being driven by one, population growth, and what we call investor confidence. There is a lot of investor interest on the Kenyan market. This is being warranted by our GDP growth as well, at 5.8% in comparison to 3.2% within the sub-Saharan sector. Then it makes Kenya a very attractive hub.
As at 2018, Kenya's population was estimated at 50 million, with an urbanization rate of 26%. Nairobi is estimated to be home to almost 5 million people, presenting a huge opportunity for not just local, but also international investors.
To international investors, it's basically heavily lent on what is their return. Because at the end of the day, if you have to compare what the Kenyan market has to offer in regards of returns, it's far much more as compared to their own home backgrounds, because there has been potential play over the years from where they originate from. So they're looking at new untapped markets, which Kenya is, really has a lot to offer.
Construction of high-rise buildings, such as the ones behind me, has become a common sight in Nairobi. The industry is witnessing continued demand from local and international investors, and this appetite is expected to grow further in the coming years. To capitalize on that interest, the government is looking for ways to woo investors in the lower income areas of the city.
Right now, we are undertaking some feasibility studies through partnership, mainly from World Bank, and other areas are getting more attractive. So soon we are calling also for an investors conference so that investors can come on board and see which area they can chip in.
But investors in this lucrative sector are also seeking government cushioning from high costs that may stifle that growth.
Well, it would be nice if government would come in and have a regulation, especially when it comes to land rates, because the land values may seem a little bit overstretched, because there is no set parameters on to what is actual land value. So the land values are they are on a high every day.
In terms of the wider framework, it is to look into how to expand some of the corridors. There are many plans along the way, and also the issue of mixed-use development, so that people can also live where they are working and minimize on the need of commuting.
As the middle class expands and the continued investment in infrastructure, the Kenyan real estate sector is no doubt poised for growth in the long term. Penina Karibe, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's head to Nigeria now as the country prepares for crucial presidential elections on February 16th. One of the main topics on the campaign trail is the economy. Now, Nigeria slipped into recession in 2016 following the collapse in the price of oil, the country's main revenue earner. It, however, came out of recession in late 2017, but recovery has been somewhat sluggish. Both the ruling APC and the main opposition PDP have blamed each other over the state of the country's economy, with each touting itself as the best party to address the challenge. We'll hear CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
No food, no work.
Is the most talked about topic on the campaign trail. Virtually all the presidential candidates are weighing in heavily on the economy of Nigeria. And of course, there's a reason for that. Since exiting recession in late 2017, the country's growth has been a drag. Latest GDP figure is 1.81% for the third quarter of 2018. Unemployment rate is at 23.1%, and Brookings Institute report estimates Nigeria is now home to the highest number of extremely poor people in the world. The incumbent government blames the previous ones before it for the situation and says it's on track to reversing it.
Nigeria earned 383 billion. Yet, poverty figures went from about 82 million to 112 million in 2012. And the numbers continued. That's the reason why we had a poverty problem. Unfortunately, with the resources we had, poverty was not addressed. In 3 years of our own government, 94 billion is what we made from oil revenues. Compare that to 383 billion. Now, what did we do from the point of view of the economy to alleviate poverty? We started the largest program for social investment in the history of this country.
The main opposition party has been hitting hard on the governing party, saying it lacked the needed competence to turn the economy around. Its presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar says he has the blueprint to fast-track Nigeria's economic growth.
Our administration is going to be pro-business, pro-private sector, because government doesn't create jobs. Government actually provide the environment for the private sector to create jobs. We will support the private sector by undertaking reforms to unleash its growth potential and to play a key role in the economy.
Nigeria's economic needs are numerous. People want jobs, they want better infrastructure, they want better education and healthcare. But the challenge is how to generate the revenue to fund all the needs. The country has had to borrow heavily to fund its budget over the past 3 years. It will still borrow to fund part of this year's budget.
The question you need to ask is, what are you spending on? What we are spending on is infrastructure. So that in itself is meant to generate revenue, is meant to do well for the economy. So we're building the Lagos-Kano rail. Our counterpart funding we put on the table, our whole counterpart funding. We've done Alajawari, we completed Abuja, Kaduna, we completed the light rail within Abuja here. Lagos Ibadan Expressway, we're doing it. Second Niger Bridge. These are borrowings that we took and we ensured that they were for infrastructure.
But Abubakar says rather than resort to borrowing, he would aim to generate funds through his liberalization policy.
The Atiku plan will undertake a deregulation of the downstream sector of the economy, review the PIB and privatize all of our state refineries that operate at 10% of their installed capacities. We shall channel the proceeds from the privatization into a special fund for the development of education and health.
Now, if you took a deeper look at the economic policies of both major political parties, there's essentially no fundamental difference in what both of them are offering. But analysts say one thing is certain: whoever emerges president will face the difficult task of dealing with the unemployment crisis in this country.
That will define whether the government will succeed or fail. If you are unable to create employment and reduce the number of unemployed people, then whatever policies you come up with is very cosmetic.
Whoever emerges president after February 16th
will no doubt have their work cut out. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's head into a quick break. Still to come. Transport systems ground to a halt in Belgium as unions call for a national strike. And the Bank of England governor describes impending Brexit as an acid test to global order.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Now here's a quick recap of today's top headlines. In Nigeria, main contenders in the coming presidential election have signed a peace accord ahead of Saturday's polls. President Muhammadu Buhari and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar have vowed to ensure they support efforts to realize a non-violent, free and fair election in, of course, Africa's most populous country. Now, they've also vowed not to use religious or ethnic profiling during campaigns. And critically, too, they promise to follow legal process if there are disputes in the polls. Meanwhile, Cameroon's opposition leader, Maurice Kamto, has been charged with rebellion and insurrection in the capital, Douala. The former government minister was arrested late last month. Kamto insists that he was cheated out of the presidential elections last year. Cameroonian President Paul Biya has pushed parliamentary elections back to the 7th of October 2019. And the Egyptian parliament has fast-tracked a vote scheduled next week on constitutional amendments. Members of parliament are expected to pass changes that could allow President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to extend his term in office beyond 2022 when his current term ends. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Now, on the international front, all flights in and out of Belgium have been cancelled due to strike action. According to the country's air traffic control, the cancellation began at 2100 GMT on a Tuesday night and will run for about 24 hours. Now, the strike has been called by 3 major trade union federations following a wage disagreement. Air traffic agency SCAES says there is no certainty about the number of staff in a limited number of key posts, leaving a cancellation as the only option. Now, it says its responsibility is to guarantee safety, and it could not do so because workers do not have to declare in advance if they will turn up or not during a strike. Flight tracking service Flight Radar 24 tweeted an image which shows the flight paths of some planes taking a detour around the entire country after the restrictions began. Well, let's get the latest from the ground. Kevin Osbeck now joins us in Brussels. Kevin, welcome to the show. Now, air traffic officials in Brussels are quoted as saying that a strike action has never had such a significant impact on the industry like this one before. It is also disrupting other public transport systems. Just half of scheduled trains are expected to operate today. Now, paint us a picture of the situation on ground right now.
We can imagine at times, especially if you are a traveler, it's pretty chaotic today. At Brussels Zaventem Airport, that's the main international airport here, there's about 600 flights going in and out of there every single day. So we're talking about tens of thousands of people having to be rerouted. The good news in all of this was we knew this strike was coming. This came as no surprise. So Brussels Airlines gave warning to its passengers saying there would be a strike this day and that would be canceled, so most people were able to rebook and reschedule. When it comes to the national rail service, that was also greatly impacted too. As you said, about half of the trains, the domestic trains, were canceled today. What the national service did try to do, the national rail service, is crowd the trains that were running during the morning and afternoon rush to try to have as little impact as possible. Brussels also has high-speed international train service that connects this city to Amsterdam, Paris and London. For the most part, though, those high-speed trains ran as usual.
Now, of course, Kevin, this strike could cost over $14 million in losses. We've heard reports that it's affected post offices, schools, hospitals, waste collection agencies, companies, and even shopping centers in the city. So how badly is Brussels affected by this?
Well, what's interesting is here where I am is the European district, where most of the EU institutions are. Foot traffic was pretty light today because a lot of people who could telecommute did just that. They stayed at home and worked from their home computers. But during the morning and evening rush, traffic was pretty heavy getting into the city because a lot of people were driving to work from outside cities like Ghent and Antwerp instead of usually taking the train because that's a much easier commute for them. So we certainly did see less foot traffic as people were staying home, but much more car traffic as those people who did have to be in the office used their four wheels to get to and from work.
Now, of course, this strike was called by 3 major trade union federations over wage disagreements. Is there any communication from the government regarding an end to the strike?
Well, Prime Minister Charles Michel did, of course, chime in on all of this. He said this strike does not solve anything. And tomorrow, Thursday, when everyone is back at work, he called on those unions to renegotiate or restart negotiations. You mentioned that these workers, these unions, are irked because of a pay increase that isn't as high as they like. An economic council working with the government recommends that these union workers should only be getting a 0.8% increase every year in their salaries for the next 2 years. These unions say that's not enough. They say they really have to take drastic action, like calling for the strike that we saw today, in order to get their message out loud and clear. So for any passengers who had a really frustrating day, the unions say, sorry, but this is action we feel we've had to take in order to make our voices be heard.
Well, many thanks, Kevin, for that update. Of course, Kevin Ozbek joining us there in Brussels. Well, let's move on now to Brexit. The Bank of England Governor Mark Carney has termed the divorce deal as an acid test for the new global order. Now, speaking at a Financial Times event in London, he emphasized on the need for everyone to take heed of the ongoing process. The UK remains on course to leave the European Union without a deal on March 29th. But this could change if Prime Minister Theresa May can convince the bloc to make amendments to the divorce deal. Now, Carney also divulged the risk undertaking by countries could undercut growth and prosperity for all. Of course, concerns over this possibility are already impairing investment, jobs and growth, creating a dynamic that could become self-fulfilling.
Brexit can lead to new forms of international cooperation and cross-border commerce built on a better balance of local and supranational authorities. In these respects, Brexit could affect both the short and long-term global outlooks. So it's in the interests of everyone, arguably everywhere, from Frobisher's grave to Frobisher's Bay, that a Brexit solution is found that works for all.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump says the March 1st deadline to reach a trade deal with China could be postponed if the two countries are close to reaching a conclusive agreement. Now, a U.S. delegation led by top trade chief Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin are in Beijing for a new round of bilateral trade talks. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He will head the Chinese side. The U.S., of course, is scheduled to raise import taxes on about $200 billion worth of Chinese goods on March 1st if the two sides cannot resolve their differences. Meanwhile, Valentine's Day is on Thursday, and some Colombians might be busier than actual lovers preparing for the romantic holiday, thanks to their work in the country's blooming flower sector. Take a look.
These Colombians are hard at work picking and packaging flowers for export to the United States. Some 35,000 tons of flowers will be on their way this year. That's 74% of America's flower imports for this February 14th celebration. The business even creates thousands of temporary jobs for locals.
We are passing on emotions or feelings more than just selling flowers. We hire some 14,000 extra temps every time of this year to pick and pack. They all know how to do it by thinking themselves as florists who pack love in the flowers and then the love would spread with those flowers.
The temporary jobs are very popular, especially among young girls.
Well, it's a very nice job. It is something that one does with love. It's not difficult to do, and it's not difficult to do it the right way. Therefore, it is a very nice job. Working with flowers is nice.
Colombia is now the world's second largest flower producer after the Netherlands. Flowers grown in a country usually have longer stems, brighter colors, and bigger buds thanks to favorable weather. The country's flower industry has been exporting for 40 years. It stands out for having the largest variety of exotic flowers and about 1,500 types that are characterized by their quality, size, color, and aroma. Xiaocheng, CGTN.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Brent crude prices on the rise today after top exporter Saudi Arabia said it will cut crude exports and deliver an even deeper cut to its production. Now, according to traders, that feel-good factor is back in play, but of course, oil bulls are by no means out of the woods just yet. Meanwhile, gold prices steadying today as the dollar slipped from a two-month peak, certainly on hopes of a trade deal between US and China. Now, gains were capped by rising global stock markets. Well, let's head to Zimbabwe now. After being hammered by hyperinflation 10 years ago, Zimbabwe is again being rolled by a currency crisis, government mismanagement and fuel shortages. Now, many businesses have folded and investors have fled over the last 20 years, but the Courtenay boot company has somehow managed to stay afloat. CGTN's Alexandria Majala with their story.
This tiny handmade shoe factory in Zimbabwe continues to beat the odds. Bulawayo City, which is a former industrial hub, has suffered the brunt of the country's collapse since 1980, which left behind mass unemployment, a landscape of derelict warehouses, and ghostly abandoned factories. Courtenay Boot Company is one of the few that are still standing.
We are very busy at the moment. I think this year we've started as one of the busiest years I've ever seen in my lifetime here. And we are very fortunate.
Founded in 1993, the Courtenay Boot Company has recently ramped up production to just 30 pairs a day, all of them made meticulously by 14 employees in a one-room workshop in Bulawayo. Sibanda and his colleagues are behind an unlikely success story based on a skilled workforce, traditional methods, and decades-old stitching machines to produce classic outdoor boots and shoes.
It's like a Rolls-Royce shoe, especially when you go hunting. People put them on, they don't have to break them in, no blisters, nothing. They just put it on and go like they've worn them forever.
Despite the shoes company's success, Zimbabwe's economic hardships cannot be ignored. High unemployment, hyperinflation, and the current currency shortage continue to test Courtenay Boot Company's survival.
Employment, 99.9% unemployment. You see how difficult it is. It's lucky if you have a job, because most of the people don't have jobs. So when you find yourself employed, you know you are that one out of 100 who is lucky. It's difficult, yes, but home is home. What can I do? I have to understand the conditions that I have to live in. I've got to suit the environment because the environment does not suit me. So I've got to change and suit the environment. Find out what is needed. How can I live? What can I do? How can I improvise?
Using only hides approved under the International Size Conservation Regulations, the shoe company makes boots from ostrich, impala, and even hippopotamus. It exports mainly to the US, Europe, the UK, and neighboring South Africa. Dina Matengo, CGTN.
Well, let's head to South Africa now. The future of housing and neighborhoods took center stage at the Off-the-Wall Human Settlements Showcase in Pretoria. Now, the platform provided an opportunity for entrepreneurs, innovators and industry to showcase new ideas for future houses and neighborhoods. Here's CGTN's Yolisa Njamela with more on that story.
Global risks such as climate change, environmental degradation and resource depletion require governments to rethink how resources are managed. To respond to these challenges, alternative interventions are required. South Africa's Science and Technology Department has undertaken to work with visionaries for new innovations. The event, a first for the country, is part of a process to develop and adopt science, technology and innovation for sustainable future human settlements. To also establish a roadmap due for completion in September this year. The roadmap sets out a 10-year plan for coordinated investment and collaboration between key partners, recognizing the demand for alternative and innovative technologies in the built environment to help achieve citizens' rights to adequate housing and improved quality of life.
We're trying to encourage new and better ways of doing things, because at the moment either we need to accelerate housing and human settlement development, or we need to save energy, we need to save water. Technologies are important to help us sort those problems out.
Entrepreneurs and innovators are an essential part of this process.
What we're looking at is to connect with innovators who have an idea and need to get that to market to benefit human settlements. We are trying to bridge the gap between what is being innovated, guys who have good ideas, whether it's at a well-developed market level or just an idea, and see what needs to be done, what barriers need to be overcome to get that to market. This is really a project related to human settlements and how we can improve the quality of life for the people of South Africa through innovation.
Entrepreneurs and innovators used the opportunity to showcase new ideas for future houses and neighborhoods.
It was designed looking at the scarcity around water, because now we know that it's a global issue. So instead of just flushing potable water, you can use the EnviroLoo, which is a silt tank. We're not polluting the groundwater resources, and what happens is that you halfway inside the tank there's blade with holes on it. Now if somebody go to the toilet, the solids will remain on top of the blade and the liquids will seep through towards the bottom of the tank. Now we are using this ceramic toilet bowl, which is easy to clean and non-staining. So for me it provides the dignity part of it when I go to the toilet, and of course it's easy to clean as well.
This innovator uses these stands for metro farming purposes.
The reason for doing the stands is because we live in a city, hence we call it metro farming. Because in the city we have limited land space, so we want to maximize space as much as possible. We want to maximize our yield, so we produce more at limited spaces. We also want to save water, because water is very much expensive and it is quite limited. So this system allows you to water your garden at least 2 to 3 times in a week, not on a daily basis.
Selected projects will be featured in a book, while all exhibited innovations will be documented in a register which forms part of the broader road mapping initiative. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Now, before we go, a quick look at Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand weaker against major global currencies, faring worst against the pound. Of course, the currency has been weighed down by disappointing local factors such as load shedding and, of course, disappointing retail sales figures. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contact on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.